Welcome to the first episode or first cast of Sheehan is Dead Comics. We like the idea of Billy. We may not necessarily like Billy that much, but the idea of him.
We're moved by the inspiration of Billy.
The ideal Billy. Oh goodness. I think a little bit of background. So I want to say Brian and I have known each other for closing it on 20 years. You say that's about right?
Getting there. I'd say a little over 21 for being official.
Has it been that long? 20. I mean, we met when I first got married to Colleen, I guess.
Yes. It was right around that time when you had just made your move. Yeah.
Okay. So 20 years. We have about a 15-year age gap, Brian being the younger man. So his experience in consuming comics and other things is a little different from mine. And I was a little kid and went to the theater to see Star Wars when it first came out, and unfortunately for Brian, he didn't necessarily get to have that. So,
and you rode your bike to the liquor store and to get your comics.
Almost. I either rode my bike or I walked downtown. We had a newsroom. I had to go to the newsroom and
like a stationery store.
No, it was an actual newsroom.
Oh, wow.
It was Hugh's newsroom in this little town in upstate New York they lived in. And, they had newspapers and they had candy and they had maybe lottery tickets. It was early on. We're talking like 1978, 77. So lottery was not like as pervasive as it is now. And he had the magazines and he had the porn and he had the comic books. And so it was hit and miss. Like I missed the first two issues of Star Wars because they just weren't there. He probably bought like two, or three copies of any given issue a month. So if you weren't like there the day they came in, you missed them. So I started collecting around the time that Star Wars 3 came out, when it was still 30 cents, I think was the newsstand rate. And so that would have been probably mid to late 77. And it was and I didn't really have a big window. So I think Brian's collecting of comics is a little more extensive in his background. Okay. I had like an 18-month time. Literally, it was probably only about 18 months. But I always loved science fiction. I loved the movies. I remember it took us 4 times to get to finally see Star Wars because they were sold out. My stepfather brought me 4 different times. We were living in Clifton Park, and then in upstate New York, suburb of Albany, and we go there, and it would just be like lines around the building, and there was back-to-back shows and through to like 10 o'clock at night, and they were all just sold out.
So you guys didn't stand online and get to the window, and then it said sorry.
You get there, and it was like sold out. It was already toast. And people were now just standing in line just to get in to see the one that they had bought the tickets for.
Oh, okay.
That's how it was. And it took us about 4 times. I don't know what month it ended up being, because it wasn't like he brought me 4 times the first week. It was like
how disappointing was it?
Pretty disappointing.
Or by the third time where you resigned that you weren't going to see it. It was like,
well, the first 2 times it was super disappointing. By the third time, it's like, all right, fine. And then he may have softened the problem, by we went and saw something else. Right. I don't know. I don't even remember what that would have been, but yeah. And so by the fourth time, we finally got to see it. So that's kind of a different experience as opposed to when you and I go to the movies. Yeah. Sorry about the bright light, just the time of day. You get on what is it, Fandango or something?
Yeah.
Order the tickets. Where we're going to sit.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different experience.
Yeah. So the 4th time when you saw it, how jazzed were you?
Oh man, it was like.
Was it like you hit the lotto?
It was just like, that opening sequence in the soundtrack. I really do believe that if John Williams did not score it still would have been special, but not
right.
That emotional impact of that soundtrack. And to me, it was like classical music for a science fiction film. Whoa. you know, because my experience, like the year prior, Logan's Run had come out, which we had gone to see, which was also, I thought, really cool for the time. But it was like this weird synthesizer, like, you know, and they would do these weird kinds of things like that. And that was either had really, or that remember like the classic B movie, like theremin sounded, you know, that really just kind of like, it just cheesy stuff. And
Sure.
so that was classy to hear John Williams on.
Classy.
It was classy.
It was classy. She had.
So what's your story?
My story. Well, as far back as I can remember, I think I was 9 and I had just discovered the wonder of the Ninja Turtles and
now I don't mean to interrupt, but I just, you know,
no.
So I know nothing about Turtles. Did they start it as a comic? Is that true?
Yeah, but I, as a little boy, I wasn't introduced to them that way. I was introduced to them on the cartoon. The cartoon.
Okay. All right. So first they were a comic, and then they went into like toys and comic, or toys in television.
Right. And I mean, when I was a child, I remember going crazy for He-Man and toys, but this is what led me directly into comic books. So then what had happened is a friend of mine who I went to elementary school, who ended up being a longtime friend into adulthood. I remember, I don't know why, but he had a comic. I think it was like a Stay Off Drugs comic. You know, this is back in the early 90s when like the war on drugs.
Yeah.
And I remember that being a pathway into it. And then
was a gateway drug.
Yeah, it was thank you. It was a gateway drug, right?
This anti-drug thing is a gateway drug.
Yes, definitely for comics. And so then right around that time, I had also just turned 10 shortly after that, and we went and saw Batman Returns. And it was the first movie that my parents and his parents like just dropped us off and were like, call us.
Oh, that's a big like rite of passage, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. And as a kid, I was very timid as a boy, and it was kind of like, oh my God, we're left alone. Someone's gonna kidnap us.
Our parents aren't worried that we're gonna be abducted.
Right, exactly. Even though you saw it on like Most Wanted on
the milk cartons. Here's all these kids who disappeared this week.
Don't worry, it won't happen to you.
No, you're stupid. They won't stupid. Take you.
Yeah, you read comic books, they'll return you right away.
They're afraid of you.
Yeah. So we saw the movie, and I remember we saw it actually the day after it came out, and I remember being super jazzed. And then they had announced Batman the Animated Series at this time, that it was coming out in the fall, because in the fall they used to always have these announcements on like Fox and other like Saturday mornings and whatnot, and always get like super hyped for them. So the cartoon came out, and I remember I was super disappointed the way it was drawn, and he had this huge
yeah
weird.
Yeah.
But then as a kid, as I fell more in love with that, heading into like 1993, the death of Superman happened. And I remember people going, I mean, if anybody who's watching this, who's around my age or even your age, in our atmosphere, in our geek sphere, that was huge. Now, my parents were very reserved people. Not that they were conservative, and I don't mean politically. I mean just very,
not necessarily the most social folks.
Yeah, like my parents. My parents weren't going to go stand out, in a line for Star Wars, for instance.
Right. Okay.
It was very much like the guarantee of we're going to get a ticket. So when the whole Superman thing happened, and there was all these crazy lines and whatnot, it was basically, sorry, you missed the boat, son. Maybe somehow, some way you'll eventually read the story, which was, at the time, as a 10, 11-year-old, it was super devastating, right?
Yeah.
So then they announced that you could pre-order Superman Funeral for a Friend. And I remember I went to the comic store with I think it was maybe my dad or my mom or dad, and we pre-ordered it. So we were guaranteed it. So then months go by, the story comes out, and you had to see it. They had it in like this clear poly bag, this big polyurethane like poly bag, and on the top was like funeral for a friend, like, but it was like written in red. It was part of the plastic, if memory serves me correctly. And then I remember I brought it home that night. I was so excited because as a kid, wasn't thinking really about the value. I wanted to read the story.
Mm-hmm.
So then my dad said, no, I'm going to give it to so-and-so. He's going to keep it for safe storage.
What?
When you're older, you'll understand.
Oh, man.
Money, blah, 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 blah. And I remember I cried and cried. And
Whoa,
cried.
yeah. That's
and
heavy.
Finally, like, it relented. All right, you really want to read the story? You know what's going to, you're not going to have the money. Or I want to read the story. So I remember just like tearing it open and just like going bonkers on this stuff. And I had no backstory on what had happened other than knowing he died.
Yeah.
And so this was like him, the world without a Superman and his funeral. And it came with I think it came with the big poster of like the superheroes walking with his casket, which takes place in one of the issues. And it was like absolutely epic. And
yeah.
An 11-year-old, it was like everything to me. It was like, this really happened, like this is happening right now,
Yeah. Okay. And so again, my limited experience has primarily been Marvel, as you know. So I know very little about the DC universe. Who was writing and drawing at this? Was this Byrne at this point or no?
No, this is years, not crazy amount of time, but
Byrne had come and gone with Superman by now.
It had been some time.
Okay.
And it's funny you mention it because today they actually announced. I think I texted it to you. They announced a 30-year anniversary cover that they're doing.
Yeah.
And today, I'm not even kidding. I'm sitting at my job and I'm like, I'm like, I'm definitely getting this one.
Black Bag Edition, is that the one?
That's the one.
Number 75.
Right. And that was a huge deal. Like when the Death of Superman, it came out in the poly bag, and that one has the armband in it too. Dan Jurgens tweeted out, he's like, don't worry, it's got the armband too, which was huge again when I was a kid. So the fact that it's 30 years from then and it comes out, I think November 8th. And I had texted you, I think I'm gonna have to double dip. I'm gonna have to buy the anniversary wraparound cover, and then I'm gonna have to buy the polyurethane, like the poly bag, the black one.
Yeah.
As a 40-year-old man, because I need it.
Well,
and
I think there's a lot of nostalgia. I think there's a big share of the market. If you look at the most, or at least what I've in my casual observation on, casts and whatnot, a lot of it is people, our age. A lot of it's about men our age that are, doing it and trying to make up for maybe, like you said, the limitations that you had as a kid because you were kind of dependent on either a very limited budget or your parents entirely. So just out of curiosity, not knowing and not looking to put you on the spot if you don't know, but I'm curious, is that issue have any significant value today? Or did they print so many of them that it's kind of like, yeah, it was a milestone story issue, but as far as value, no.
Correct.
Yeah.
They print, dude. They sold that out the wazoo. Print.
Okay.
The only one, the only way you can have it of any value really, is I have a CGC 9.8 signed by Dan Jurgens, who was the writer. The artist on the last issue. And I need, I think I need Brett Breeding to complete the signature series.
A second signature.
Right.
And then it'll have like
more value. Yeah. Like I bought it, 2 years? I bought it like 2.5, 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago. And I bought it for, I don't know, like $120, $30 on eBay.
Okay.
I don't know what the, market value is, quote unquote.
So it's not huge sick money. It's not like
right. It's not like you have The Walking Dead #1 and the TV show came out and oh my goodness gracious, it's worth all this money. So
I'm sure that stuff is going to degrade or decrease.
Yeah, like
It probably already has.
what's his name? Liefeld says on his podcast, The Fever. You got to
Yeah.
get it while there's the fever. About the Batman cartoon. That I started collecting Batman comics because this also was like me continuing the adventures I saw on TV in my head. So I didn't have to wait till the next episode to go on my next adventure with Batman, right? And then that led directly into Batman Nightfall, and then into Knight's Quest, into Knight's End over years, and then No Man's Land. And so my addiction to Batman comics was just lit. I remember going into the comic store and tracking down back issues of Nightfall that I couldn't get my hands on originally, when Batman got his back broken. And then I remember, at the place I went to, it's out of business now on Long Island. It was in Patchogue, called Cardboard Sports. And the owner, Brian, and his dad, they'd be like, yeah, we've got the whole set. And they would bring it out from the back, and it was like 12 comics, 1 through 12, and another, like polyurethane bag, like the Superman Funeral for a Friend. And it was $75. It's like, man, if I had 75.
In what year are we talking?
It's like 93, 94. So I'm like 11 going on 12. And $75 back then was a lot of money.
Sure. That was.
Well, you could probably fill your refrigerator, for
yeah, right. Absolutely.
So it was big. It was like, oh man, I wish I had $75. And so that was that. I always remember that, seeing them hold it, and it was so tantalizing. But then as the next few years went on and the story had kind of, gone into the next story, I was able to collect them, and I had them. And then I had the issues of, I think there were 2 or 3 Shadow of the Bat ones that tied into it.
So you were buying singles? You were talking about like off the rack?
Yeah, buying singles. And then
so do you still have those? Because I felt like you didn't really have any singles.
No, I don't. I sold them all years ago, probably 2010-ish.
All right.
9, 10.
All right.
And then I remember going to the comic store every day because there was the Return of Superman was happening in like 94-ish, 94 into 95, but definitely 94. And on the issues, they had the triangle. So it would be like Action Comics. It would be like issue number 15. It would be like part 15 of the story. And then it would be Adventures of Superman. And it would be like part 16 in the triangle. So you knew where the story was going. So you knew which ones to pick up to stay on top. And I remember buying everything Superman, everything on, because he was on his way back. And I was just like the coolest thing ever. I remember the four covers of Superman and being like so in love with them. There was the green one, which was the Eradicator. There was the blue one, which was Cyborg Superman. I think there was a red one, which was Superboy. And then I think there was a third one, which I forgot the color, but it was I believe that one was John Henry Irons, the Steel, the black dude who made the Steel outfit, non-Superman. And I remember just loving those and collecting the Return. And then again, that turned into Nightfall, and I was collecting that. And then after Nightfall was Prodigal. After Nightfall, it was Knight's Quest, where Azrael, who was Asbats, he became the Batman. He was the Batman after he beats Bane. That's Knight's Quest. That goes on for a period of time. And we'll do an episode on this too, everyone. So we'll go like Nightfall, Knight's Quest, Knight's End. And I just remember being absolutely in love and like chasing those down. But even those, like especially Knight's End, I had like part 1 and part 2. And then like part 5, I couldn't back then, you're going to your local comic store. And again, my parents weren't going to drive around God's creation. They weren't like that.
Yeah, sure.
My other friend, his parents were like that. His dad was like that. But then, after Knight's End, Prodigal came out, and Prodigal was huge. And I was like there on the ground floor where Batman has Dick Grayson, Nightwing at the time, become Batman. And I remember collecting all those issues and then going to the newsroom stationery store.
Yeah.
and trying to track down ones the comic store had sold out of, and like just loving that story over and over and over. So
Hmm.
that's really the roots, the trail mix of my genesis of geekdom.
So okay, so you said you ended up selling your singles collection circa 2010, let's say. It doesn't really matter exactly when, but at some point you came where you made the decision to sell. How many roughly did you have in your collection at the time that you sold? And was there a gap? Like, had you stopped collecting? These things are in the closet, years have passed, and I'm just, whether I need money or I just don't care.
Yeah, they're taking up space.
Uh,
Let's see, I was what, 20, 28, 27, 28 at the time.
mhm.
And it was like, comics, comics.
So you were consuming different media at that point.
Right. Like at that time, Batman Begins had come out in 05, and I was like, wow,
Mhm.
and then The Dark Knight came out and Iron Man came out,
So you really weren't actively involved in
in
the
the,
comics at that point.
right. I was more into the movies, and then, like I had these beautiful Batman Begins posters that I professionally framed, and I took them out of my bedroom, and I actually gave them to a couple of friends of ours who've since grown up. And it was like, yeah, it was like, I'd kind of passed them by. But when I was a kid, even into my teenage years, I collected and had gaps of stopping.
Yeah.
But never like I fell out of love with it. Whereas at this point, I was kind of like fell out of love with comics that was taking up space. And then this is really when the trade and hardcover market started to blossom.
Right. Yeah. That's it. When you say that, back when I was more actively, of course, as a younger man, once I was an adult, I don't remember there was no such thing as omnibuses,
Right. Or
in,
deluxe
in the early
hardcovers.
90s or whatever,
Yeah.
because that would have piqued my interest. I probably would have been into that. I didn't have a giant collection. Like I say, I had Iron Man, Demon in the Bottle, that run, and I had Dark Phoenix and the stuff when Byrne was just coming on to X-Men, the Star Wars early stuff, post adaptation of the first film. And so I probably had like somewhere between a short box and a long box worth. That's all I had, because my window was very short. And like I say, I was dragging them around, and then I needed money, and so I ended up selling my collection, in which I totally, oh man, I just got ripped off big time. But that's neither here nor there. And then I was done with it. And like I said, if and a little bit later, when I had a little bit better employment and a little better financial situation, if the Omnis were on the shelf at that point, I probably would have started collecting those, back then. But it just didn't exist. And I kind of
Omnis. I don't even remember Omnis really. I mean, someone in the chat or someone will be like, oh, they could furiously type away and tell me I'm wrong. But
yeah,
I don't remember Omnis really hitting my sensory until like maybe a year and a half ago. I know they had existed,
right. But
as far as I don't know, I just feel like Omni Fever is at an all-time high right now.
I agree with that, especially since we're seeing reprints and whatnot. So the first time I really became aware that they were doing the whole Omni thing was my wife and I were in Boston, and this has got to go back a while now, because I've bought and sold. I was in a bookstore, and down in the used section of the bookstore in Cambridge, I came across the Fantastic Four first printing of the first Omni they did for Fantastic Four, one of the big tomes. And they were selling it at a reasonable price. I think it was selling for like $49 or something, and it was in good shape. So I bought that, and there was two others that were smaller. Maybe one was Thor, and I don't remember what the third one was. And I wasn't buying it for myself. At that point, I was buying and selling books. And I guess that's one of the things we didn't mention in the bio is that I'm pretty much a full-time buyer and seller, not so much in comics. I add that to my, but I do vintage books. So anyway, I saw the opportunity and figured there's value there. And I liked Fantastic Four as a kid. So I got it and since sold it. Go ahead.
I just Googled like real quick.
Yeah. What
I
year?
I don't know the first Omni that sold, without digging a little deeper, but do you remember?
I bought this used and it had to be.
But was it like
it's like the ones that you have.
No, but was it a story like from the Silver Age or was it something
John Byrne artwork was on the cover. Okay. I think it moved around through a lot of it was definitely one of Marvel's early Omnis. It wasn't intended to be just like one story arc. It was like, because again, it was one of those like 700 or 800 page ones. And so I think it had the origin at the beginning, from 1964 or whatever it was, 61. And it did that arc, and then it did Dr. Doom stuff, and then did later stuff, and it did Byrne stuff, and it was just a giant thick book that was like bringing about like all the quote unquote classic Fantastic Four stuff. And so that's probably close to 15 years ago, I'm going to say, that I bought that and then ended up selling it 2 or 3 years later. I mean, I put it up for a fairly high price, and it took about 2 years to sell, but it sold for what I was asking for it. And I was happy. I probably almost tripled my money on it. All right. So if it's cool with you, I'd like to go off topic, or at least switch topics off of comics for a few minutes.
Sure. Do you think?
All right, man. So I'd like to share, this is, not Sheehan is Dead comics is about comics, but it's also about media and books and other things. So I do vintage books. And one of the things I'd like to share is actually something that's, if this is going to, there we go.
Here we go.
Okay. So I got this. Where did I get this? I got this at a library sale or at an estate sale within the last couple of weeks. And this is by Grosset and Dunlop. And if you're not familiar with that publisher, they are the folks who brought us Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. But probably what a lot of people don't realize is, in addition to those two being the most famous of, they refer to these as children's series books. So before little Brian or little Scotty could go down to the stationery store or the newsroom and get comics, we had to buy these. And these were a little bit pricey. It wouldn't be just for anybody necessarily, but again, probably in some ways similar to a comic, a little more costly. The cover price of this may have been, this is 1916, by the way. So this predates the Hardy Boys. It predates Nancy Drew. I think the first Nancy Drew was 1927. I think the first Hardy Boys, don't quote me, I haven't looked at one recently, but I want to say again in the 20s. I don't think they were in the teens. So they were dabbling around, getting their formula down for those later successes that they had. But it's funny, right? The motion picture chums wore spectacles. So our heroes in this series were a group of boys who ran theaters in New York or Jersey. And they had exciting adventures running movie theaters back in the teens. And these books chronicled those adventures. Although apparently the adventures weren't that great, because this series only lasted for 7 books. But the point that I want to make here is that if you're trying to find out if you have a first printing, that can be a challenge. Typically on later books, you go to here, the copyright page, and from the 1970s on, for the most part, it's much easier to know. This offers very little information. And one of the things that the publisher, Grosset and Dunlop, did is they would list the original copyright, and never ever, because they were a budget printing house, They would never change any pages they didn't have to change, because that would cost money to reset the pages and have to print them and et cetera, et cetera. So the copyright page had the original copyright, and that was it. Never got updated. This would have had a paper cover, a jacket, which would have been nice and would have had some clues on it. Although, again, it wouldn't have had dates per se. I wish it did have the jacket, because on books like this, the original jackets are far more valuable. If this book is a $700 book like it is, as you see in my hands right now, if it had a jacket, it could be a $2,000 book. So so that's a tip right there in itself. But what you want to do with the Gross and Dunlop, especially if it's not Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys, is in the back, they had advertising where they wanted you to buy the other series books. So sorry, Tom Swift, and it would list the titles. And it goes on and on here. They have like 16 pages of all their different things they were doing. Here's our motion picture chums. What's this other one? The moving picture boys. Those were people who actually made movies. So motion pictures were a big deal in the teens. Outdoor chums, the boys of Columbia High. Anyway, the tip, without getting too ridiculous, is what you're going to do. There we go. Is you're going to go through the ads in the back or the front of the book, and you're going to look up the last one in the list, and you're going to see when it's published on Google. And what you're looking for to see if you indeed have the initial printing, which would have the most value, kind of like a #1 comic, right? Generally has the most value, is that none of the advertisements and the ads were published after 1916. If this book was published in 1916, then we want to go through the ads and make sure none of the ads show anything that was published post 1916. Because if it did, then that showed that this was published in 1917 or 1918 or whatever year, and therefore was not a first edition. It was a later printing. So that's my tip. And these books are collectible. These series books, there's many of them. Gross and Dunlop was the most successful and had the most, but there's others. Whitman did it, A.L. Burt, etc. A lot of other people jumped on the bandwagon, but a lot of people collect these, particularly the smaller series that had smaller runs because there was fewer of them. So you can find value in collecting the children's series books. And so that's a tip if you're trying to find out if you've got a first printing, is go by the ads and just Google the dates of the books in the ad, and you can date it that way, even though the copyright date won't tell you what printing. And I'd like to segue back into comics, and I'd like to share what might be a semi-regular feature. This is the Kirby cover or Kirby issue of the week. So this is OMAC. This is one of my favorite mad crazy Kirby, total Kirby creations. I mean, it's so ridiculous. I mean, look at this thing, a woman in like floating in fluid in a box, and OMAC is throwing her through the air. I'm not even sure if you could do that today.
Let's just clarify, because when you first got me going into Kirby, I was like, wait a minute, OMAC is Batman. It's the one man, what is it?
It's one man Army Corps.
No, that's what that is. But it's like the one metahuman. Chris Clow said it on a comic binge recently. Shout out to Chris Clow, comic binge. Paul Herman, love you, bro. OMAC, the OMAC project. And Batman made it. So this is separate. This is predates Infinite Crisis. This is the original concept.
Oh, yes. Right. Okay. So
I just wanted to distinguish, because people like me who might be newer to comics are like, how does OMAC and OMAC? I don't understand, because I didn't.
Right. So the original OMAC was a Jack Kirby creation at DC. It only ran 8. It was 8 issues. It was bi-monthly. This first issue here, I'm looking at the info on the bottom of the title page, was the September and October 1974 issue. So this is a 1974 comic. This is how this thing opens. It's just,
Wow, that's so weird.
it is. It's totally weird.
It looks like torture, like some kind of S&M torture.
Yeah. Well, what it is, I guess, is they're building basically robot in boxes and they're shipping them out. And then OMAC comes in and says, you know, because I don't know what the crime is. They're like turning people into robots or what they're doing exactly, but they're like manufacturing fake humans in boxes and shipping them. And so this is the kind of stuff that my dad, like before I was old enough to go to the store to get my own comics in 1977, back when I was, you know, little, as you said, little Robbie Liefeld, well, little,
And you were a little Scotty, right?
little Scotty. So I remember being five years old.
Power stash. Anyway, continue.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I didn't have the power stash or the glasses, not quite yet.
Or the cool hair. Yeah.
Or the cool hair.
Or the 3D printer.
Maybe it was cool. Yeah.
That was probably still cool. Yeah, you're right.
But he'd come home. I remember him coming home from work and I'm outside there in the summer and I'm playing. And he brings me home comics that he picked up from work after he, you know, left work or whatever. And it was like The Witching Hour from DC Comics, if you've ever seen that. And I wish I had a copy of it. I haven't found that copy. You and I have been to the Comic Cons. I've been looking for it. I haven't found it yet. But it's like of this supernatural swamp tree in the swamp. And it's like holding it, it's using its roots to like hold these two little children down in the water, you know? So this is what my father's bringing me home when I'm like literally 4 or 5 years old. And he's like, here, read this.
Yeah.
This is good for you, you know?
Bill's character. Yeah.
And so I was just, you know, I was like, the weird stuff got a hold of me because it was like, that was, you know, I've never had any use for Superman. You know, but give me Witching Hour or OMAC.
Holding down little kids and trees. You're all over it.
Here, little boy, have this messed up thing. Oh dear.
You should watch. You should watch the Comic Binge with Paul Herman, and I'll send you a link, and Chris Clow.
Okay.
But Chris Clow is the most intelligently articulate comic book fan I've ever heard in my life.
Okay.
He espouses the virtues of comics like they're Shakespeare, and like he's teaching a class, like, but in a very, not in any sort of
like with errors.
But I think someone like yourself, you would super appreciate hearing this guy talk. Chris Clow's like around my age. He's a couple of years younger.
Sounds good. Maybe you could strike up a relationship with Rob and you could say, hey, Rob, can we crash at your place? We got to go to San Diego, because he makes it sound like it's just down the road. Oh, Rob,
you'll have to get on Twitter and message Rob.
All right. Thanks for tuning in with us, guys. Whoever you are, guy, person.
Guy, girl, guy.
Yeah. Human
As
people.
long as you're breathing air and you understand words.
Yeah. And maybe you read a comic once.
Yeah, at least once.
So we hope you enjoyed issue 1 of She and His Dead Comics. And remember, whoever this way is not she him.